About 15 years ago, about 15 years ago, I was sitting in my living room and we had just visited a school that we thought we might send our son to because he was on the spectrum and he had trouble with regular school. And we didn't end up sending him there, but the woman who ran it told us a story about her son and how he had visited this doctor because he had all these issues with hearing and with sensory overload. And the doctor, and he'd been hitting his head against the wall, this poor kid. He was so upset with it. And the doctor said, "Oh, you're sensitive to sound, and there's things we can do." And he talked about how he was going to help him with that. And the son looked at his mother, who eventually started this school, and said, "Oh, so I'm not broken." And I was very moved by this story. And I was sitting there on my chair thinking about it, and I heard the words, "No one is broken." And I was so excited by that, so surprised by that, so moved by it that I literally jumped up out of my seat. I did. I got up out and I said, "No one is broken. No one is broken." And I knew that those three words became a kind of North Star for my life from that, both my creative life and just my regular life, for how I dealt with my son or raised my son and dealt with myself and so on. That thought, "No one is broken," would eventually become an essay in the New York Times called "No One is Broken," about how raising my son helped me with so many different things, the lesson I learned from that, but also became the book "Everyone Has What It Takes," which was part of the grew out of a lot of the lectures I was giving to writers based around raising my son. So that "No One Is Broken" was one of those big lightning bolt moments that happen sometime in our creative life. An idea strikes us and it gets us so excited, so stimulated that we jump up out of our seats. But there are other ideas come to us that are not so electric, but just as useful. I remember I was going to give a talk down in Portland to the writing organization down there, and they said, "What do you want to talk about?" And I don't remember how I just threw out the title, Fearless Writing. And I didn't know what it was. And the guy who was running the organization said, "Oh, I like the idea of that. Why don't you do that?" And I was like, "Okay, I wonder what I'm going to talk about." So I had some things that I'd been teaching that seemed related to fearless writing. And I gave the talk and it went great. And I thought, "Oh, this fearless writing thing." And I taught some more classes. And one day I was at a writers conference and this agent was talking to me and I was talking to her about the kind of things I was doing. And she says, "That could be a book. That could be a book. I think the things you're talking about." And I thought about writing a book about this subject. And I thought, yeah, yeah, that feels pretty good. And that feeling pretty good became the book Fearless Writing, became this podcast. And it wasn't this great, exciting, electric moment. I didn't jump up out of my chair, but the idea of giving that talk and the idea of writing that book, when I thought about it, there was no resistance. That is, the path just seemed to open. I wasn't excited, but there was nothing blocking my way. There was nothing I was forcing by at least starting that book, by coming up with the ideas that would become that talk, for instance. There was just no resistance. And I think that most of the ideas that I have loved, that I've come up with, most of the book ideas and the story ideas and the essay ideas and the songs I've written, most of them have just started with a little kernel of something for which I had no resistance. And I just decided to follow it until I met resistance. And often what would happen is I just didn't meet resistance. And then gradually my excitement for the project would build until I was occasionally jumping up out of my seat. But it always starts with just a lack of resistance and me following that. And I think it's why it's so important. And I've talked about it a lot on this podcast. When you are writing along on a sentence to sentence level, the thing I'm doing, and I think we're all doing, but I've become more aware of, is I'm always testing for resistance. Am I forcing that sentence or does it feel natural? Am I forcing it or does it feel natural? And knowing the difference is a big part of my craft, what we call craft now, being really fine tuned. If I sense a little resistance or none at all. And it's a subtle difference, but the more I can pay attention to that difference, the better, in my mind, my work gets. Resistance, no resistance, because we can get used to resistance, you see. We can get used to forcing our way through things. And it doesn't ever work out. Usually if we're forcing an idea in a story or something or a relationship in our life, eventually the resistance will get so great we'll have to stop. And so it's why writing is such a great skill in the arts in general, but writing is such a great skill because we have to train ourselves to recognize resistance as soon as we feel it and know that, nope, not that way. I'm not going to force anything through. I'm not going to teach myself to work through resistance. I'm going to recognize it and wait till an idea comes for which there is no resistance. Yeah, that's the real craft of writing. Once you get the basics down, well, even once as you're getting the basics down, you have to always keep learning how to feel resistance or no resistance. It's an ongoing practice. And the better you get at it, the more satisfied you are with what you've written, and the more naturally what you've written reads, the more effortlessly it rolls forward, as opposed to plodding along or feeling like you can feel the author sort of controlling what's happening as opposed to the thing unfolding the way it's supposed to. Yeah, it's true. Seek the effortless path, boys and girls. Seek the effortless path. Yes, indeed. Hey, thanks for tuning in. You know I love doing these, so hit subscribe if you don't want to miss anything. And if you like it, say so. Say so. I love to hear from you. So, till next week, this is Bill Kenower. Stay fearless.